October 2nd, 2025, the night the skies over Crimea burned. In less than a day, a series of precision strikes shattered the calm and rewrote the rules of modern warfare. Explosions rippled across airfields and radar stations once believed untouchable. Russian military posts went silent, and thousands of civilians rushed toward the Kerch Bridge in panic. What exactly happened in those 24 hours? How did Ukraine manage to break through one of the most fortified regions in Europe? And what does it mean for the future balance of power in the Black Sea? Tonight, we trace the timeline of a single day that exposed the limits of high-tech defenses, revealed the rise of drone warfare, and left both sides questioning what comes next. This is Military Worldline News, and you're watching our full breakdown of the operation shaking Crimea, the strike that changed everything. The morning of October 2nd, 2025, began in near silence over the Black Sea. In the pre-dawn haze, the winds were still, the horizon faintly silvered, until a fleet of unmanned aircraft appeared on radar screens across southern Crimea. They came low, almost hugging the surface of the water, invisible to most sensors, weaving between natural terrain folds and sea clutter. Within minutes, that silence was gone. Explosions rolled across the peninsula, marking the beginning of a 24-hour operation that would rewrite the tactical landscape of the region. The first strike. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the first wave of Ukrainian drones struck an airbase deep inside occupied Crimea. Their target, a pair of B-12 amphibious aircraft known in NATO classification as MALE. Though relics of the Cold War, these planes played a surprisingly critical role in Russia's modern Black Sea operations. Equipped with updated sensors, they patrolled vast maritime zones, detecting low-profile threats such as Ukraine's uncrewed naval drones, small, fast, and often nearly invisible to conventional radar. To destroy the B-12s was to remove the eyes of the Russian fleet. The amphibious aircraft had served as the early warning scouts, flying long, slow circuits to track movement from the Odessa coast to the approaches of Sevastopol. When the drones hit, both planes were caught on the ground, their wings torn apart by secondary fuel explosions. Satellite images later confirmed the destruction, showing blackened craters where the aircraft once stood. But the true brilliance of the strike lay not only in its precision, it lay in its timing. The attack occurred just as radar maintenance rotations were switching shifts, a detail suggesting that Ukraine's planners had studied and exploited the rhythm of Russian base operations. The second wave. Barely half an hour later, new detonations were reported at another airfield near Jankoy, further north. This time, the targets were Mi-8 transport helicopters, the workhorses of Russia's armed forces. The Mi-8, known by NATO as the HIP, can carry troops, ammunition, or medevac personnel, serving as the logistical backbone of frontline operations. Losing 3 of them in a single strike meant far more than just burned equipment. It meant a sudden loss of flexibility for Russian command and supply movements within Crimea. The attack also targeted something far more significant: a Nebo U mobile radar system, the core of Crimea's long-range air defense. The Nebo U is designed to detect a spectrum of aerial threats, from ballistic missiles to stealth cruise weapons. Acting as a central watchdog, it feeds tracking data into the S-400 and S-500 defense systems. Its destruction tore a hole in Russia's radar coverage, creating what military analysts call a blind corridor, a stretch of sky through which future Ukrainian strikes could slip undetected. A chain reaction of vulnerability. The success of these initial strikes set off a chain reaction. Once the Nebo U radar went offline, coordination between radar units and interceptor systems weakened. Anti-air batteries were forced to rely on shorter-range sensors, leaving them vulnerable to further saturation attacks. To observers, the scale and synchronization of the operation indicated months of careful planning. Intelligence specialists believe Ukraine employed electronic reconnaissance and satellite tracking to map Russian radar positions across the peninsula. By analyzing radar activation patterns, Ukrainian planners could predict where gaps would appear once key systems were disabled. This operation, sources later suggested, was not an isolated mission. It was part of a larger strategy to dismantle Crimea's defensive network piece by piece. In modern warfare, the first battle is often for data, and this one was no exception. Each wave of drones forced Russian radars to switch on, revealing frequencies and locations for Ukrainian analysts monitoring the electronic spectrum. Exploiting the weakness. The strikes also showcased how cost asymmetry can redefine combat effectiveness. The S-400 system, one of the most expensive in Russia's arsenal, is optimized to engage high-altitude jets or ballistic missiles, not small, low-flying drones built from carbon composites and consumer-grade electronics. Firing a multi-million-dollar interceptor at a $20,000 drone is both economically unsustainable and tactically inefficient. Ukraine exploited this mismatch with textbook precision. The first wave consisted largely of decoy drones, cheap and expendable, designed to trigger radar activation and drain interceptor missiles. The second wave carried high explosive payloads aimed directly at the radar emitters and parked aircraft. In effect, the defenders were lured into revealing themselves before the real attack even began. As one defense analyst later remarked, they turned Russia's strength, its layered air defense, into its own trap. The human element. Inside the bases, reports from local channels described scenes of chaos. Personnel scrambled to respond as power generators failed under the shock of multiple impacts. Communication lines between air bases reportedly went down for several minutes, adding to the confusion. It's in such moments, experts note, that human error multiplies technical failure. When radar operators, under stress, misidentify threats or delay activation, the most sophisticated systems become vulnerable. The aftermath revealed a sobering picture: burnt fuselages, shattered radar dishes, and smoke rising from fuel depots painted the peninsula's most fortified region as momentarily helpless. But beyond the damage itself, the operation delivered a powerful psychological message. Crimea was no longer beyond reach. Strategic and symbolic impact. By daylight, Ukrainian and international monitoring sources confirmed three major successes: the neutralization of maritime surveillance aircraft, reducing Russia's ability to detect seaborne threats; the loss of transport helicopters, limiting rapid deployment and evacuation capabilities; the destruction of the Nebo U radar, creating temporary blind zones in the air defense network. This triple impact reshaped operational calculations on both sides. Ukrainian naval drones operating in the Black Sea gained a wider margin of maneuver, while Russian planners were forced to reroute flight paths and reassign radar units from less critical zones. Yet, analysts emphasized that the operation's broader purpose was strategic paralysis, not occupation. By disabling command nodes and surveillance, Ukraine sought to turn Crimea from a launch pad into a liability, a region that consumed resources rather than projecting power. New intelligence dimensions. According to Western defense observers, the sophistication of the strikes hinted at international coordination, not through direct participation, but through shared intelligence frameworks. Data from satellite constellations, maritime reconnaissance, and electronic intercepts may have supported target identification. However, the execution, timing, sequencing, and adaptive drone routing bore clear signs of Ukrainian command innovation. As one retired NATO officer commented, "What's remarkable isn't just the hardware, it's the command logic behind it. They're thinking like an air force without air superiority, and that's forcing everyone to rethink defense models." The dawn after the fire. When the smoke cleared, residents across Crimea awoke to uncertainty. Videos posted online showed traffic jams stretching toward the Kerch Bridge, with civilians attempting to cross into southern Russia. Local authorities downplayed the scale of the strikes, but satellite imagery and multiple independent reports confirmed severe disruption at several military sites. In less than a day, Ukraine had demonstrated that precision, coordination, and intelligence could rival and momentarily overwhelm one of the world's most expensive air defense networks. The operation's success both tactical and psychological, would echo through the following weeks. But for the soldiers and commanders on the ground, October 2nd was more than a headline. It was a signal that the nature of warfare had changed, that the front line was no longer measured in kilometers, but in data links, algorithms, and the will to adapt faster than the enemy. The 24-hour strike on Crimea wasn't just about explosions. It was a live demonstration of how information, strategy, and persistence can dismantle even the most fortified illusion of safety before dawn ever breaks. The strikes of October 2nd were not just explosions in the night. They were the unfolding of a new kind of warfare. What happened in the skies over Crimea was not simply a contest of firepower, but of logic, algorithms, and adaptability. Ukraine's 24-hour operation exposed how 21st century wars are fought as much through data and timing as through weapons and manpower. The cost equation modern warfare, at its core, is a matter of mathematics, cost versus effect. A single Russian S-400 missile can cost over $1 million, designed to destroy high-speed jets or incoming ballistic missiles. Yet the Ukrainian drones that triggered these systems often cost less than $30,000 apiece, some built from carbon composites and commercial off-the-shelf parts. When these small aircraft entered Crimean airspace, Russian radar operators faced an impossible dilemma: engage or conserve. Firing meant wasting multi-million-dollar munitions on low-value targets. Holding fire risked letting an actual strike drone slip through. Ukraine's commanders clearly understood this tension, and they turned it into a weapon of its own. This is the heart of asymmetric warfare, when a cheaper, more agile opponent forces a superior power into economically unsustainable responses. As one defense analyst put it, each Ukrainian drone costs less than the fuel Russia burns to shoot it down. Layered attack strategy. The October 2nd assault was not random chaos. It was carefully structured in waves. The first wave consisted mostly of low-cost decoy drones, unmanned craft designed to look threatening enough to make defenders respond. Their purpose was psychological and electronic, to trigger radar activation, force air defenses to reveal their locations, and deplete interceptor stocks. Once the Russian systems were lit up and locked on, a second wave of precision strike drones and long-range missiles entered from multiple directions. Some came from the north, others from the sea, all flying low in irregular paths that complicated radar tracking. Their targets were specific: radar antennas, fuel depots, and aircraft parked on open runways. A third wave followed hours later, not to strike, but to observe. Reconnaissance drones assessed impact zones, collected imagery, and transmitted data for follow-up strikes. The entire sequence resembled an orchestra where every instrument entered at a precise moment. The message was clear. This was not improvisation. It was design. Electronic and tactical dimensions. Ukraine's planners combined electronic warfare with kinetic strikes. Jamming units operating from undisclosed coastal positions emitted interference signals aimed at disrupting Russian communications between radar posts and command hubs. In modern air defense, the moment a radar loses contact with its central control, coordination collapses. The result: some units fired too early, others too late, leaving deadly gaps in the defensive grid. Meanwhile, Russian commanders discovered another problem: signal saturation. With dozens of drones flooding radar screens simultaneously, operators struggled to distinguish real threats from decoys. It was a digital fog of war, where the very systems designed to bring clarity became overwhelmed by noise. Such tactics reflect an evolution in Ukraine's doctrine. Early in the conflict, drone attacks were mostly tactical harassment. By late 2025, they had become strategic tools, instruments to dismantle infrastructure and expose command weaknesses. Each operation became not just a strike, but a field experiment in defeating layered air defenses. Impact on command and control. When the Nebo U radar was destroyed in Part 1's initial strike, its absence triggered cascading failures across Crimea's integrated air defense network. This system acted as a nerve center, linking early warning stations with missile launchers and aircraft squadrons. Once it went dark, the communication chain, the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, stretched dangerously thin. Without timely radar input, commanders were forced to rely on backup sensors with shorter range and slower data relays. This created a phenomenon military theorists call decision lag, the delay between detecting a threat and reacting to it. In high-speed aerial warfare, even seconds of hesitation can mean total system failure. As Ukraine's second and third strike waves entered Crimea, this delay proved decisive. Russian operators, uncertain of where the next hit would land, diverted defensive firepower in multiple directions, fragmenting their response. By the time interceptors were launched, most targets had already completed their attack runs. Adapting to the invisible enemy, Russia's air defense network was designed primarily for large, high-speed targets, fighter jets, bombers, or cruise missiles. Its radars, powerful but limited in precision at low altitudes, struggled to detect objects flying below 100 meters. The Ukrainian drones, flying slow and near ground level, effectively disappeared into the radar clutter. To counter this, Russian forces employed mobile Pantsir S-1 systems and anti-drone rifles in localized zones. These defenses did achieve some interceptions, but they were not enough to prevent the larger objective: degradation of surveillance and loss of command cohesion. Ukraine, for its part, refined its drone routes with topographical data, using valleys, coastline shadows, and even civilian radio signals to mask movement. It was a form of terrain-following warfare, a tactic borrowed from modern stealth aviation, now applied at the scale of drones no larger than a motorcycle. The economics of precision. By midday on October 2nd, the cost-effectiveness of Ukraine's strategy became undeniable. For every $1 million Russia spent defending the skies, Ukraine spent perhaps a tenth of that to neutralize critical systems. But the true value wasn't measured in money. It was in strategic access. With radar gaps now open, Ukrainian long-range missiles gained corridors through which they could strike deeper targets, command bunkers, airfields, and ammunition depots. The immediate effect was tactical. The lasting impact was psychological. Crimea, once touted as an impenetrable fortress, had been proven vulnerable. Analysts also noted a doctrinal shift. Rather than striking purely symbolic targets, Ukraine's operation aimed for systemic degradation, a method known as strategic paralysis. It's the idea that disabling the enemy's sensors and communication can achieve more lasting results than simply destroying weapons or troops, countermeasures, and future adaptation. In response, Russian engineers began relocating radar units and installing additional short-range sensors near high-value assets. Reports indicated that new anti-UAV nets and laser counter-drone systems were being tested. However, these measures face logistical limits. Crimea's wide geography, combined with continuous attacks, makes total coverage impossible. Meanwhile, Ukraine's evolving drone fleet, blending Western-supplied components with local production, continues to adapt. Machine learning guidance systems now allow these drones to reroute autonomously if GPS signals are jammed, a feature once reserved for advanced cruise missiles. Western observers point out that such tactics have global implications. They illustrate a shift towards software-defined warfare, where agility in code and coordination can outweigh brute technological superiority. This is what 21st century air combat looks like, one military analyst remarked. It's not dogfights, it's data fights. A battle beyond the horizon. As night fell again over Crimea, the air defenses were still struggling to re-establish a clear picture of the skies. In 24 hours, Ukraine had tested, and briefly dismantled, one of the most expensive integrated defense networks in the world. The battlefield had become a laboratory for the future. Drones against radars, algorithms against algorithms. The war of systems is no longer confined to missiles and planes. It is fought in code, in sensors, and in the split-second decisions of human operators facing a storm of digital deception. And while this phase of the operation ended, its consequences were only beginning to unfold. in the command rooms of Moscow, the strategy offices of Kiev, and the naval corridors of the Black Sea, where a new balance of power was taking shape under the shadow of the drones that refused to be seen. When the last of the explosions faded over Crimea, the sound that followed was silence, a silence that carried far beyond the peninsula. What had begun as a series of tactical drone strikes quickly rippled outward, reshaping the balance of power in the Black Sea and reverberating through diplomatic circles from Ankara to Brussels. The events of October 2nd and 3rd were no longer just a regional skirmish. They had become a strategic turning point, one that tested alliances, redrew naval boundaries, and exposed the delicate interplay between military success and geopolitical consequence. A domino effect across the Black Sea. The immediate military outcome of the strikes was clear. With key radar systems and aircraft destroyed, Russia's Black Sea fleet faced a sudden reduction in surveillance and operational coordination. Ships that had once patrolled aggressively beyond Sevastopol's harbor began moving closer to shore. Satellite imagery released days later showed several large vessels, including missile corvettes and landing craft, relocated to safer anchorages or partially hidden in ports. For 2 centuries, the Black Sea Fleet had been the instrument of Moscow's maritime dominance. Its presence allowed Russia to project influence into the Mediterranean, pressure NATO's southeastern flank, and secure energy transport routes. But now, the very fleet that symbolized that dominance was forced into a defensive posture. This vacuum of presence did not go unnoticed. Regional powers immediately began to recalibrate their naval strategies. Turkey, in particular, seized the opportunity to reaffirm its central role as the gatekeeper of the Black Sea, a role enshrined in the 1936 Montreux Convention, which grants it control over the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, the Montreux leverage. Under the Montreux Convention, Turkey has long possessed the legal authority to regulate the passage of warships into and out of the Black Sea, but that authority, though respected, often existed in a balance with Russian naval power. The weakened state of the Black Sea Fleet changed that dynamic almost overnight. With fewer Russian ships operating freely, Ankara's influence expanded quietly but significantly. It could now dictate maritime movements with greater confidence, knowing that no comparable power could challenge its control of the straits. Turkish analysts began describing this as a new naval equilibrium, one where Turkey became not merely a regulator, but a de facto guarantor of maritime order in the region. This shift held major diplomatic implications. Within NATO, Turkey's enhanced position bolstered its leverage in defense negotiations. For countries like Romania and Bulgaria, Turkey's assertiveness was reassuring, offering a stronger buffer against potential escalation. For Russia, however, it meant a diminished ability to use the Black Sea as a strategic pressure point. In essence, the Ukrainian strikes had not only disrupted radar networks, they had redrawn the power lines of the sea, energy and economic ripples. Beyond the military implications, the strikes also affected one of the region's most critical concerns: energy security. The Black Sea is home to vital oil and gas pipelines, fiber optic cables, and maritime trade routes that link Europe to the Caucasus and Central Asia. For years, Russian naval dominance allowed subtle intimidation over these corridors. Energy vessels transiting near Crimea operated under a shadow of uncertainty, often altering routes to avoid military zones. But as Russian naval presence waned, the risk perception shifted. Commercial shipping traffic between Constanza, Varna, and Batumi rose in the weeks following the strikes. Offshore energy projects in Turkish, Romanian, and Bulgarian waters, once viewed as potential flashpoints, gained renewed investor confidence. For the first time in a decade, regional energy planners began openly discussing expanded exploration and pipeline security agreements under NATO's umbrella. From a geopolitical standpoint, this was as transformative as any battlefield victory. Ukraine's precision strikes had indirectly stabilized the Black Sea's commercial lifelines, making them less susceptible to coercion and more aligned with collective European security. Civilian reactions and the human dimension. While militaries analyzed radar charts and satellite photos, the civilian population of Crimea faced its own reality. Following the October 2nd strikes, social media and independent news outlets reported massive traffic congestion along the roads leading to the Kerch Bridge, the symbolic and logistical artery linking Crimea to mainland Russia. The exodus was not officially organized. There were no government orders or mass evacuation campaigns. Instead, families packed their cars and left voluntarily, fearing more attacks or disruptions to essential supplies. The image of cars stretching for kilometers across the bridge became one of the most telling visuals of the aftermath, not of destruction, but of doubt. This spontaneous migration reflected a profound psychological shift. The notion that Crimea was permanently secured under Russian control, a narrative cultivated for over a decade, began to erode. Fear replaced certainty, and uncertainty bred movement. For Ukrainian strategists, this was an unintended but powerful side effect, the loss of confidence among the occupying civilian base, which undermined Moscow's long-term efforts to alter Crimea's demographic and political fabric. Strategic crossroads for Russia. For the Kremlin's military planners, the aftermath of the attacks posed a difficult question: reinforce or redistribute. To reinforce Crimea would mean pulling advanced air defense assets and fighter squadrons from other critical fronts, particularly the northern and eastern sectors. But to redistribute would mean accepting a weaker hold on the peninsula. Both choices carried risk: logistical, operational, and symbolic. Analysts suggested that Moscow might instead seek to harden inland defenses and rely more heavily on electronic countermeasures and decoy systems rather than fixed installations. But even this strategy would be reactive rather than assertive, a sign that Russia's initiative in the Black Sea had been fundamentally blunted. On the Ukrainian side, officials remained cautious. The strikes were described not as escalatory, but as part of a broader campaign to degrade the capacity for aggression originating from Crimea. The goal, they emphasized, was not territorial conquest, but the neutralization of military infrastructure threatening Ukraine's southern coast and trade routes. In that respect, the operation achieved a rare balance, a tactical victory with strategic consequences, without crossing the threshold into uncontrolled escalation. The global perspective observers across Europe, Asia, and North America saw the 24-hour operation as a case study in modern conflict. Military academies dissected its sequencing, think tanks debated its legality, and defense ministries noted its implications for future warfare. Three themes emerged from these discussions: the decline of static defense systems, complex networks like the S-400 and S-500, designed for symmetrical wars, struggle against the mobility and unpredictability of drone swarms; the rise of hybrid tactics, operations that blend information warfare, cyber disruption, and electronic interference now hold equal weight to conventional strikes; regional realignment, Turkey's ascendance, NATO's renewed focus on the Black Sea, and the erosion of Russian naval dominance collectively reshape the post-Cold War maritime map. These trends point toward a broader truth. Power in the 21st century is increasingly measured not by territory held, but by information controlled and networks disrupted. The Black Sea, once dominated by a single fleet, now stood as a shared and contested arena, a proving ground for the technologies and doctrines that will define future wars. Echoes beyond the battlefield. In the weeks that followed, Crimea's airfields remained under heightened alert. The Russian Navy, though still afloat, operated under new constraints, and across Europe, military analysts adjusted their maps of influence. The events of October 2nd and 3rd were no longer seen as isolated attacks, but as the opening act of a long-term transformation in regional security. Ukraine had demonstrated that strategic precision could achieve what mass offensives could not. Russia, for its part, faced the challenge of adapting to a war fought on terms it did not anticipate. And for the international community, the lesson was clear. In the age of drones and data, the line between battlefield and geopolitics has all but disappeared. What began as a 24-hour strike in the night had evolved into a defining moment, a reminder that in modern warfare, silence after the explosions can be just as powerful as the blasts themselves. The 24-hour strike on Crimea was more than a headline. It was a message written in fire across the night sky. In a single day, Ukraine revealed that modern warfare is no longer decided by sheer numbers or legacy hardware, but by intelligence, adaptability, and precision. The destruction of radars, aircraft, and air defenses didn't just weaken a military position, it shattered a myth that any fortress is truly impenetrable in the age of drones and digital warfare. For Russia, the events marked a painful reminder that even vast arsenals can be undermined by smaller, faster, and smarter forces. For Ukraine, it was proof that strategy and timing can offset imbalance. And for the rest of the world, it offered a clear glimpse of how the wars of the future will be fought, not only with missiles and machines, but with information, innovation, and willpower. The impact of those 24 hours continues to echo across the Black Sea, reshaping alliances, trade routes, and military doctrines alike. The question now is not who holds the strongest weapons, but who can adapt the fastest. At Military Worldline News, we break down these global shifts with clarity, accuracy, and respect, separating fact from noise so you can understand what truly shapes our world. If you value independent defense analysis and balanced reporting, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and turn on notifications to stay informed about every major military development shaping the 21st century battlefield.